Rodney King is a man whose trials and tribulations helped start the journey to compromise police brutality. The people wanted change, and they were going to get it by any means necessary. Footage released from March 3rd of 1992 allowed the public to view Rodney King's altercation with the police. The man who videotaped the incident, George Holliday, did not realize he recorded such impactful footage. This video took the people by shock as they saw policemen wrongfully abusing those of color. At the sight of this video, the public became infuriated of those who abused their authority in order to inflict pain on those who they believed were inferior to them. In August of 1965, a similar incident with police occurred with Margaret Fry. Just like King, Fry was pulled over for reckless driving and beaten. This event caused a riot spurred by residents of Watts neighborhood, but eventually, the riots grew to over a 50-square-mile area of south-central Los Angeles. The 1965 riots foreshadowed future events, such as the LA race riots, just 27 years later. Since the 1965 riots were not addressed by officials, the violence in 1992 was more extreme because the previous acts during the Watts riots had no compromise. The main difference between these two occurrences was the availability of a camera. King's incident was nationally publicized, increasing tension so that the LA race riots were more than double the size of the Watts riots.
It was on March 3, 1991, when Rodney King, a 26-year-old African-American who eventually became known internationally as a California police brutality victim, was chased through the city of Los Angeles. Although King had multiple previous charges on his record, in this situation, he was charged with driving under the influence. After an on-the-road speed chase by the California Highway Patrol officers, they eventually caught up to him. He was told to get out of his car and did just that. Once he got out of the vehicle, Officers Brasino, Powell, and Wind, and Sergeant Stacy Kuhn then proceeded to kick him, tase him, and beat him with metal batons repeatedly for 15 minutes. They also taunted him with language that no one should ever be told. While all of this took place, several other officers stood around and did nothing. Sergeant Stacy Kuhn, Officers Powell, Brasino, and Wind were charged with assault with a deadly weapon and excessive use of force. Kuhn was also charged with filing false reports. On April 29, 1992, policemen involved were found not guilty. After the LA community heard the verdict, violence was sparked on the corner of Florence and Normandy. People did not agree at all with the decision of the trial. They felt they were being betrayed by the people that were supposed to keep the community safe. Large numbers of people and groups in Angel County, California, started structure fires, looting, mob violence against innocent citizens, and even a raid of the California Police Headquarters. The decision the community made as an effect of Rodney King's situation was definitely taken out of hand, although the black community did have a reason to feel discriminated against. The violence spread from Florence and Normandy avenues to areas throughout the city. Around 6:45 p.m., cameras captured gravel truck driver Reginald Denny being forced from his truck and being beaten nearly to death. He was saved by 4 strangers. This is an example of the ruthless violence that occurred on day 1 of the riots. On day 2, April 30th, 1992, the National Guard was deployed to areas where the most help was needed. Schools, jobs, and everyday activities were canceled. Also, a citywide dusk-to-dawn curfew was implemented. On May 1st, 1992, Rodney King broke his silence on the issue by giving a public statement. King was upset about the outcome of the trial and stated, "We'll get our justice. They've won the battle, but they haven't won the war." King also wanted the people to work together. When referring to the riots, he said, "It's just not right. It's not right, and it's not going to change anything." While King was interacting with the public, more than 1,000 Korean Americans and others joined for a peace rally at Western Avenue and Wilshire Boulevard. Racial tension between African Americans and Korean Americans was very high. Koreans felt targeted in the riots and equipped themselves with shotguns and automatic weapons for protection against looters and bombers. However, the next day, an estimated 30,000 people marched in Koreatown for racial healing in support of beleaguered merchants. Korean Americans endured nearly half of the damage to buildings during the civil unrest, which equaled $350 million of the $785 million in property damage. Finally, conditions began to improve on May 3rd when the National Guard took control of the city. The dusted-on curfew was removed, the harbor freeway ramps that were closed on the first day of the riots were reopened, and bus services resumed. On May 4th, 1992, the city of LA returned to work and school. Overall, there were roughly 40,000 lost jobs, 400 injured, 17,000 arrested, and $1 billion worth of damage. The protests and riots that took place as a result of the violence against Rodney King was a cause of the Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act of 1994. This is the largest crime bill of the U.S., which totaled to $30.2 billion. Title I of this act established a new grant program to hire, equip, train, and provide support services for community service police. Funds also provided specifically training police in problem-solving and conflict resolution skills and new management protocols to promote community police. The Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act of 1994 can be interpreted as a compromise due to the brutal beating of Rodney King. The act was intended to counteract any possible chance of police utilizing violence to solve any issues since they received new training. Unfortunately, many police officers are still not thoroughly trained enough in problem-solving skills, which has caused many conflicts similar to the barbaric violence used on Rodney King. The Crime Act could have prevented many altercations due to police brutality, but it was an unsuccessful compromise. The police force has inadequately used their power repeatedly and has not been reprimanded by the United States Department of Justice for their unlawful actions of killing African Americans.
Are you aware of the Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act of 1994?
Yes.
Do you think that this act had a positive or negative feedback from the people?
Negative.
Why?
I think that some of the stuff that we do, I don't think the general public really understands our job, and that most of the time we have to make a split decision really quick.
In the United States, African Americans are more likely to be brutalized by the police. However, men have been brutalized more than women in the past. Michael Brown Jr. was only 18 years old when he was shot and killed by Officer Darren Wilson. Wilson was not charged. Eric Garner was 43 when he was killed in a chokehold and quoted, "I can't breathe," several times. Officer Daniel Pantaleo was not charged for the illegal chokehold of Garner. John Crawford III was 22 when Officers Sean Williams and David Darkrose shot and killed him. Both officers were not charged. Tamir Rice is one of the youngest victims of police brutality. Rice was only 12 years old when he was shot and killed by officers Timothy Loman and Frank Gumbark. Both officers were not charged. Ayanna Stanley Jones was only 7 years old when she was shot and killed by Officer Joseph Weekly, who was allowed to keep his duty after the incident. Stephen Clark was 22 when he was shot and killed. After the shooting, some footage was caught on tape by the body cams of the police. However, some of the footage was muted. Body cams have been created to hold police accountable for their actions. However, they are ineffective because if the camera can be muted, they cannot capture what the police are wrongfully quoting. The people want an effective resolution to prevent police brutality and to penalize police for abusing their power. Rodney King was not the first victim and would certainly not be the last victim that sparked the beginning of the Black Lives Matter movement, a movement that takes on the faces of these innocent and wrongfully discriminated African Americans, a movement that uses these victim stories to make the future better and safer for those who fear policemen, people who are supposed to be upholding the law, but that are instead abusing it. Rodney King, a direct victim of police brutality, posed a question so simple that it became a famous statement of his. Can we all just get along? This statement questions why racial discrimination exists